the mission where silence became the enemy. Silence is not always peaceful. Sometimes, it is the first sign that control is slipping away. In environments built on constant confirmation, the absence of sound is not neutral. It is a warning that something fundamental has changed. This mission did not begin with tension. Systems were nominal. Communication flowed as expected. Voices moved calmly between orbit and Earth, maintaining the rhythm that defined safety. Every exchange was routine, predictable, and unremarkable. The kind of communication that fades into background awareness precisely because it is functioning. To understand why this story still matters today, we need to understand how deeply spaceflight depends on sound. Not noise, but confirmation, acknowledgement, the steady reassurance that someone is listening. Communication in space is not simply the exchange of data. It is the continuous thread that connects an isolated human to the infrastructure of support below. When that thread holds, it is invisible. When it breaks, it becomes everything. The astronaut sent routine updates, status checks, simple confirmations. Each one answered promptly, until one wasn't. A transmission went out. Nothing came back. At first, it felt insignificant. A delay, a minor disruption. Space is full of them. Signal interruptions happen for dozens of reasons, most of them temporary and self-correcting. The astronaut waited, calm, methodical, trusting redundancy. The systems were designed for exactly this kind of gap. Backup pathways existed. Alternate frequencies were available. There was no reason to believe this silence was anything more than a brief technical hiccup. Seconds passed, then minutes. The silence began to stretch beyond expectation. What had initially felt like a momentary pause began to take on a different quality. The astronaut rechecked equipment. Transmitters active. Receivers operational. The spacecraft was doing its part. The silence was not coming from within. It was coming from outside, from the other end of the link, where voices should have been. Inside the spacecraft, nothing appeared wrong. Instruments were steady, power stable, systems responsive, and yet the absence of response carried weight no alarm could match. An alarm tells you what is wrong. Silence tells you nothing. It removes the ability to assess, to confirm, to calibrate next steps against shared understanding. Silence does not provide information. It removes it. And as the mission continued without a voice on the other end, the astronaut realized something unsettling. This was no longer just a communication issue. Silence was becoming the mission's greatest threat. The astronaut followed procedure exactly. Backup channels activated. Alternate frequencies tested. Each step completed with precision. The training for communication loss is thorough and specific. There are protocols layered upon protocols, designed to reestablish contact through every conceivable path. Still nothing. The absence of response forced a shift in mindset. Communication was no longer a given. It was now a variable. And variables demand contingency. The astronaut had to begin operating under the assumption that communication might not return for an extended period. That meant recalculating every aspect of the mission through the lens of autonomy rather than collaboration. Without confirmation from Earth, every decision became heavier. Timing adjustments, power usage, orbital considerations, all normally guided by constant feedback. Decisions that had been shared responsibilities were now solitary ones. The weight of each choice increased not because the choices themselves were different, but because validation was absent. There was no one to confirm the right path, no one to catch an error before it propagated. Now, feedback was gone. The spacecraft felt quieter than before, not because systems stopped, but because reassurance had vanished. The hum of equipment replaced human voices. Breathing became the loudest sound in the cabin. The astronaut became acutely aware of the mechanical rhythm of the life support system, a sound normally drowned out by conversation and operational chatter. Now it was the only companion. The astronaut reviewed autonomy protocols. These were rarely used, designed for extreme cases. Silence was not yet classified as emergency, but it was drifting closer. The protocols assumed a temporary loss of contact, perhaps minutes, perhaps an orbit. But as time continued to pass without a signal, the astronaut began preparing for the possibility that the silence could last longer than any protocol anticipated. Ground control was somewhere below, unseen and unheard. The question was not whether they were listening. It was whether they could respond in time. Silence began to distort perception. Minutes felt longer. Choices felt sharper. Waiting became a decision of its own. The astronaut noticed the subtle psychological effects of prolonged isolation from external confirmation. Confidence, which normally draws strength from shared understanding, became something that had to be generated internally. Self-trust replaced consensus. And in that quiet, the astronaut understood a difficult truth. When communication disappears, leadership does not. It concentrates. And every choice now belonged to the person in orbit. The pressure built without sound. No alarms, no countdown, just a steady accumulation of responsibility. Each passing minute added another layer of autonomous decision-making to a mission that had been designed around constant collaboration. The astronaut evaluated options carefully. Continue holding position and conserve resources, or just orbit proactively, risking misalignment without confirmation. Both paths carried risk. Neither offered reassurance. Holding position was safe in the short term, but assumed communication would return soon. Adjusting orbit addressed a longer timeline, but introduced new variables without the ability to verify them against ground calculations. This was the emotional peak, the moment when isolation stopped being theoretical and became operational. Training echoed in memory, but training assumes communication returns. Every rehearsal of communication loss ended with the signal restored. The scenario where silence persists indefinitely was acknowledged in theory, but never truly internalized. Silence removed that assumption. The astronaut chose structure over instinct, established a strict internal schedule, logged every action, slowed decisions deliberately. Order was the only defense against uncertainty. By creating a framework of self-imposed discipline, the astronaut replaced the external structure that communication had provided. Routine became a substitute for reassurance. The spacecraft moved through darkness, Earth passing silently below. Without voices, perspective narrowed. Survival depended entirely on judgment and restraint. The astronaut focused on what could be controlled and released what could not. This was not resignation. It was strategy. This was the true conflict of the mission. Not equipment versus environment, but mind versus isolation. The enemy was not a system failure or a mechanical breakdown. The enemy was the absence of connection and the psychological erosion that follows when a human being operates without the confirmation that another human being is aware of their situation. Eventually, a faint signal pierced the quiet. Static first, then fragmented words. Communication reestablished, delayed but intact. The voice on the other end carried the same professional calm it always had, but to the astronaut, it sounded different. It sounded like evidence that the link between orbit and Earth had not been permanently severed. Relief followed, but was controlled, because the silence had already changed the mission. It had proven something essential. The most dangerous enemy in space is not failure. It is the absence of certainty. When communication fully returned, the mission stabilized quickly. Systems realigned. Timelines corrected. Officially, the incident was classified as a temporary disruption. On paper, the gap in communication was a footnote. In practice, it had reshaped the entire character of the mission, but the experience left a permanent mark. Silence had forced autonomy sooner than expected. It revealed how thin the line is between support and solitude at the edge of exploration. It demonstrated that the infrastructure of communication is not merely functional. It is psychological. It is the foundation upon which shared decision-making, confidence, and operational rhythm all depend. For the astronaut, the lesson was clear. Technology extends reach, but responsibility always remains human. When voices disappear, judgment must carry the mission forward. The systems can maintain themselves. The spacecraft can hold its orbit, but only a human can decide what to do when no one is there to confirm the decision. This story matters today because future missions will face longer delays. Communication gaps will be normal, not exceptional. Astronauts will make decisions knowing confirmation may arrive too late. The deeper humanity pushes into space, the wider the silence will stretch. Silence will not mean failure. It will mean leadership. And those who travel farther will need to be prepared not just to act, but to act alone. Subscribe to join the journey.